All right, welcome back from the short break. Hope you guys had a chance to get inspired by some of the fascinating perspectives Adam has shared with us over the last couple of days. We are on the home stretch in the second half of day 3 of TechCon 2025. I'm Andy Harmon, your host of the App Dev and Runtimes track. Right now, we're going to hear from one of our business partners, and in just a second, I'm going to hand over to Prashant and Niranjan from Pragma Edge. But please, just as a reminder, don't forget, post some questions out into the chat. Let's make this interactive. Let's learn together. We'd love to hear from you. And then at the tail end, please don't forget to execute your surveys. But with that, Prashant, I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's get things started.
Thanks, Andy. Greetings to everyone on the call. So we are from Pragma Edge, as Andy mentioned, right? So we are a global software, SaaS, and consulting services company. We are headquartered in Jacksonville, USA. And we also have our operations running from Hyderabad, India, and Dubai, and the Bangalore locations. So we, as a services organization, software service organization, we have our offerings predominantly in the integration area. That integration includes app integration, API integrations, and the partner integrations. We are also focused on the watsonx based AI solutions, be it GenAI or solutions around the cognitive solutions that we bring into the industry. We are also into the process automation solutions, which includes the DPA, the digital process automation solutions. Plus, we are also into the asset management solutions. And all these service lines we bring in to across the industries, be it banking or retail or manufacturing, and across these things, right? In this today's session, we are going to talk about some of the solutions that what we have in offering in the GenAI world, focused on the IBM ACE. Apart from IBM ACE, we have other GenAI based solutions that we have built in the observability area, in the code generation area, or in the process automation area. But today's focus, we are going to talk about the Agentic AI solution that we have built for creating an efficient the code generation component for the IBM ACE. And we have Niranjan, our senior solution architect, who is one of the co-writer of this particular solution. He's going to run us through the overall solution, what we have got, and we are open to the questions. And thank you for this opportunity. And over to you, Niranjan. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Prashant. Thanks, Andy. Hi to all. Yeah, here myself, Niranjan. I have total 18 plus years of experience, predominantly on IBM integration solutions. Mainly, right, like I'm AI enthusiastic and I develop AI apps. Okay, this solution, as Prashant mentioned, we will be concentrating mainly on IBM ACE SDLC lifecycle, and it has kind of a combination of both automation and GenAI. I'll detail more in upcoming slides. And the right hand side, the picture which you can see, right, like it's generated from an AI, right? Like we provided a couple of things like overall solution, which understood our solution and like it generated out of it, right? We started right like generation from here. Okay, next going to right like it in today's session, this is the agenda. First, we will discuss about like integration solution about the Genie, why we are calling Genie. I'll detail it out. And we will discuss more on high-level agentic AI framework, where we used and how we combinedly used for this entire SDLC lifecycle. And we can see how agents, what are the inputs to agents and what are the outputs, how different agents come together to provide kind of an SDLC lifecycle solution. And last, solution highlights and what are the different features of this solution. Finally, we'll end up with the benefits of this solution journey, how we can integrate with the different solutions. And last but not least, what and all the technology stack we use as part of the solution. Yeah, now as we talked about integration AI solution Genie, why I'm calling Genie is it's a one place holder where for an integration starting from a requirement analysis till a generation of deployment scripts, we used AI capabilities to generate the outputs, right? As soon as like any of the integration projects, right, like requirement analysis means from a functional team, we will get a functional solution documents and a functional diagrams or process diagrams, and also right, like a very detailed documentation. And these documentations can be on a Jira, or like it's on a Confluent, or like a different documentations, right? These are kind of a source input for this. As soon as we get it, right, like we have a right, like what we are expecting out of this is right, like as usual SDLC lifecycle, we will go each and every document, we'll identify integration touch points, and out of this, like we will create kind of a documentation on our understanding, basically predominantly on our integrations. When it comes to next is right, like this requirement analysis output will be input for a high level design. Also right, like a couple of meeting discussions, and like by understanding these two, right, like as usually we will generate right, like high level design documents and right, like yeah, document creation and like reviews and all. Right, next comes to right, like a developers, it pass on to developers where code generation, like a developer has to write a code from end to end, right, like by understanding these reading out these documents and further right, like meetings with different teams. Finally, like the test case generation, right, all these three will be inputs for test case generation, right, like we have to create kind of a unit test cases or like writing a test case report for that, right? Finally, right, like all these deployments artifacts has to be deployed. For that, like we need to generate deployment scripts. Okay, with this, right, how we can use GenAI capability with Agentic AI, right, like Agentic AI framework, from a start to end, right, like we can generate it from a requirement analysis, right, like by passing a required functional documents and process diagrams, right, like all these things as an input, it understands all these integration touch points from an integration point of view. Let's say if a document has a lot of connectors, like a lot of like external systems or internal core systems, it identifies the source application and the target application. Based on that, right, like as we know from ACE, we are having out of a box, right, like connectors, right? Those we call it as a node patterns. It understands that, and right, like it provides kind of like details about this. Okay, for this integration requirements, these are kind of like a different integration patterns like we can use. That will be kind of like output from a requirement analysis. In upcoming slides, we will discuss in detail about this. Second one is right, like high level design, like whatever output from a requirement analysis will be input for generating a document on high level integration design. Here, like it understands each right, like integrations and how we can implement this integration solution in detail along with the process diagrams. It generates, AI generates process diagrams also, and a description about each and every right, like integrations, plus also what and all kind of dependencies, risks, right, like it will be part, right, like we will provide as part of a high level design. That also right, like AI will generate. Okay, right, like next come to application code generation. This is crucial part for the developers, right? Now, I'm not saying right, like it will generate 100% code generation, and definitely right, like with our experience, right, like it generates 60 to 70% accurate code. When I say code accuracy, code generation, not only right, like generating a transformation logic is equal or a JSON, right? It also right, like it will generate a message flow, right, end-to-end message flow. Let's say a system is connecting from a right, like from a source system, let's say HTTP, and like a target as in a SAP system. It understands both these integration nodes, and it creates a HTTP input node and like output as in a SAP connector node. And in between there will be a transformations routing logic and all, right. Initial framework, right, like the complete message flow framework with connected nodes will be available for a developer to kickstart. You need not to start from a scratch. That is the advantage of it. When it comes to generate test cases, right, for this, like inputs will be from right, like high level design will be input for this, and also right, like couple of a code, it's generated from a transformation logic or like the flow. Everything will be input to generate a test cases, and it generates a test case documentations where it can refer and execute to make sure, right, like we will be having an end to end, right? Not only this, once this code is generated, right, like we are having an agents to review the code. What like initially GenAI has created, plus like any changes from a right, like a developer, finally like it will review complete code and it will provide kind of results to it. That is kind of like advantage of using this integration AI solution, right? Finally, now right, like we came to deployment script, right? From a requirement analysis, we will get to know what and all the systems, whether it could be right, like the cloud systems or like virtual machines, wherever, right? Based on those inputs, right, like a deployment scripts will be right, like created. As of now, we are targeted Terraforms, right, like it can be extended to cloud formation also. That is an idea of this end to end. Okay, with this, right, like we'll go now, we'll get into high level AI solution GenAI architecture. As I said, right, like we are started using like Agentic AI framework. As we know, right, like there will be different agents for each functionality, right? Starting from, and like all these AI agents will be controlled by orchestration layer, right? Like this is the key part of it, right? Like multi-agents coordination and like the prompt router from developers as well as the source and integration request from outside, right? As part of this solution, we are having a different components. First is knowledge base. Whether like here I thought of like using a vector DB, most of the people's using also with knowledge graph. Why? Because like it supports a agentic AI framework, and also right like agentic RAG, right, like it's connected to this. Sometimes right like there will be a request of a predefined kind of like a requirements. From there, like it will pull out and provide kind of a response to developers, a designer, and architect, or like a CI/CD DevOps team, right? Complete DevOps team can use this solution to get kind of answers at any point of a time. Let's go in deeper, right? Now, as I said, right, like we wanted to consider each phase requirement understanding as kind of like this document agent, what it does, right? Like it will go and connect to different like the source, right? Like repositories. It can be document repository as a Jira or like Confluence, or maybe a couple of times we will get kind of requirements from mails. Okay, all these integrations will connect through right like integration layer through proxy. One of the main factor and like a predominantly we should be very careful when we are doing kind of like a AI solution is security. For that, right, like we will be having this. Also, right, like a agentic AI framework, we will be having kind of like a couple of system safeguards, right, like for a seamless integration. Right, it provides kind of a complete security to our solution. Let's say go into like one by one solution, right? Let's take an example of a designer. A designer want to understand what and all kind of like requirements, right, like integration requirements as part of right, like the functional or a solution documents from a solution architect or the functional specifications, right? As soon as it says, right, like this framework will understand, okay, this guy is asking to get kind of like a requirements from the source, right? Like it will go and connect through these integrations, right? And also pass the context, complete context of this the source content from this knowledge base. Then it is passing to right like a requirement understanding agent, where like by passing kind of a question as well as a complete context, it understands what really right like looking for, and it analyzes and like it identifies the integration touch points, and it will response to developer usually, right? When right like a developer want to generate some code, let's say like there are a transformation logic as part of this. You wanted to generate a complete message flow along with the subflows by identifying a source and target systems. Like as we know, we are having around right like 60 to 70 different identified node patterns also, right? Like it generates a custom the connectors also, and that is a feature of this. Okay, by identifying a source and target like the protocols and like the integration patterns, okay, it generates a complete end-to-end flow along with in the transformation logic. As of now, we use like a mean to say compute nodes, developing kind of an ESQL code for that. In this one, right, like we tried with very simple transformational logic, also extended to complex, right? Like that will also, it has a capability to generate and provide kind of a developer about this code agent, right? And here, if you can keen observe, right, like I used different LLMs for each step. It's based on our understanding and like our experience, right? In generating kind of design documents, we used a Mistral 7B. It was doing amazing job, not only from generating kind of diagrams, also right like a description content of it, right? Like now it's a kind of like a latest versions of Mistral are coming up, and but like Mistral 7B has generated very well. And next one is right like this complete, like as we know, Watson orchestration or can connect to right, like other LLMs, right, like outside of LLMs. So right, like I'm giving different LLMs, how we can combinedly use this and achieve like a complete agentic AI framework. When it comes to right, like a test case generation, Gemini Flash 2.5 is the kind of like a model we used to connect to it. And like here, code generation, IBM Granite understands the code and like generates ESQL or Java code very efficiently with accuracy, right? Like for like in the next slide, I will touch upon right, like what are the inputs to each and every agent, like what is the expected output, and like how these combinedly connected each other and provides output for na SDLC lifecycle. We will discuss in detail about that. Finally, like a test case generation, right? Any tester as part of a group, he can ask, can you please generate a right, like a test cases for particular flow from source to target. Let's say from HTTP from an external public portal to right, like a core application MQ, right, like where it will be consumed by internal applications, right? Let's take that an example. By understanding this, it will generate a test cases to us, right? Like what will be the test case, the tester need not to write from the scratch. By understanding it, like he will be having kind of a template along with all test cases. Okay, he can start from there, he can enhance it from there. With our experience, right, like a high level design document, it will be more accurate than 60%. Like when it comes to code, right, like it was around like 50 to 60% of what I can say. You can save test case generation, right, like a 70 to 80% it was generating accurately. When it comes to deployment scripts agents, now right, like from here source documents, right, what and all the environments we are available, what and all the different systems are available, right, like where flow is coming up, and like based on that, right, like the deployment scripts will be generated. Then right, like it can hand over to any of the CI/CD team where like they can start using instead of like a start writing from a scratch, right? As part of this agentic framework, these are kind of like the pillars, right? A system safeguard, right? Like whenever we are doing it, security is a prime. Okay, right? Like how accurately like we can maintain, how accurately, how efficiently like we can safeguard entire solution. Thinking from a perspective of code should not be going outside, right? Like this watsonx, right? Like easily connected and like it provides that facility, right? Like ethical framework. This is what like any GenAI, it should be ethical. Like how compliance our complete solution will be to this. And as I said, like a seamless integration, as we said, out of the box, like 128 different connectors are available, right? Like using that, how efficiently we can connect to them and providing right, like a system A can understand XML, system B can understand a JSON, how effectively we can transfer. Also, right, like any of the right, like PSI details are there. Let's say right, like a credit card numbers or like a OTP details, how we have to mask that. It has a capability to understand and like provide this end-to-end transformation capability. Iterative validation, right? Maybe right, like one time it will generate a code, right? Like it may not be accurate. Okay, then right, like we can again pass to a couple of agents to verify it. So right, like until we get kind of best results, like there will be iterative validations from each of the agents. Okay, adapt AI models. As I said, Watson is a platform. It provides to use like external, right, like LLMs also. Like if you say Gemini Flash or like a Mistral, right, like any others, Llama 3.2, any of the LLMs outside, right, like easily we can integrate and start using them. This is very high level, right, like architecture, right? With this knowledge, we will get into this is very interesting. As I said, how different agents work together as a team and provide kind of right, like expected output, right? Like from requirement agents, what will be kind of inputs? There will be prompt is kind of like we have to train any of the LLMs, right, like with the few charts prompts, also right, like a predefined of prompts saying right, like, and also it need to have kind of like a details about the documents, as we mentioned, these documents from Confluence or these documents from Jira or like from mails, right? Those connectors will be there, it has to connect. Okay, right, like it takes a prompts and it will be having a complete context and like it will pass on to respective LLMs, it generates output and like all the integration related requirements based on the prompt elaboration will be available. Okay, then when it comes to design, right, what and all integration requirements will be input for a design agent. Also, right, like for a design, there will be different prompt related only to design. This will be pre-configured. So these two will be inputs for these design agents. It understands both this and it generates a complete documentation. Okay, documentation with a predefined template, right? Like it will be updating to each and every section. Let's say, right, like starting from the purpose of a document, like a high-level design, also, right, like complete the flow of an integration, right, along with this mapping understanding. All these things, like from high-level design, it generates, and like we have not tried with a low-level design, but right, like this is pretty good on a high-level design, right? When it comes to coding agent, this will be it acts as kind of like another developer, right? When it comes to code generation, right, like a design agent output will be very much useful. From here, like it understands in detail about the description, so that with this, and also right, like other input parameters will be best practices, also right, like a prompt what it has to right, like a generate by using these best practices, or like industry followed standards to generate right, like a transformation logic or like a message flows from the perspective of naming standards for each, right? When we observe, like when any right, like a node will be inserted into message flow toolkit canvas, we can see the name of that one, right? That from that generation, and like adding of a node and connecting each and every component, like it will take care, and like it will generate, right? Whatever output of this artifacts will be message flow generation, transformation is equal generation. Now it comes to right, like the last phase of it, right? Okay, right, like based on this, right, like it will generate kind of an testing. Also, right, like all these details will be input to deployment agents, where like using terraforms, right, like it creates right, like ant scripts, right, ant scripts are like a terraforms, right, like everything it will create, and finally like a deployment scripts will be there ready for our CI/CD team. Okay, with this understanding, we can go to right, like this is kind of a key slide. Right, like till now we understood right, like a end-to-end SDLC lifecycle from App Connect, how we can achieve it without having any issues using GenAI capabilities, or also right, like predominantly using a Agentic framework. And latestly, right, like a Buzz is using like MCP, we can achieve more. I still I have to try this MCP, the protocol, how effectively we can use Agentic framework, right? Now, right, like coming to solution highlights, as we discussed, like a message flow based generation using NLP, right, like ESQL Java code based on like a best practices industry coding guidelines. These are kind of like inputs to it, and using kind of an agentic chain of thoughts, right, like it will generate kind of a message flow along with the ESQL. Right, next comes to right, like a deployment scripts will be generated with this will be used for the next automation, right? That is kind of now key input to right, like a CI/CD team. Okay, when it comes to test case generation, most of the times like we will spend a lot of a time these test cases, right? They should not be missing like any of the integration patterns, like each step starting from input messages, right, like a transformations, routing, filtering, like what is the expected output. Okay, also right, like all positive and negative scenarios has to be considered while generating test cases. That based on like a chain of thoughts of an AI, we can implement this with a particular prompts, right, like aligned to it. Next comes is like high level interface documents, right? Now, like it will not generate kind of like a unstructured, like just a junk of a description, right? We will be having like a predefined templates, to only templates, right? Like whatever like output from this GenAI, right? We will be adding to predefined sections pertain to it. End of the day, right? Like we will be having kind of an any company standards, like when I'm working on a right, like any integration projects from Pragma Edge, I expect that the client will be looking at kind of like right, like how like any complex integration solutions, how easily you can put it onto a document, correct? With for particular headers, like at the top table of contents, and like using kind of like a proper alignment, everything that template will take care. Okay, right, like we will passing kind of like input text data to template, we will be having a ready of on a PDF and a Word formats. End of the day, right, like it will go and store into right, like a destination locations where this designer can have a look, and like if any enhancements, like you can right, like change it and store it there. But like this will again, like this will be input for code generation as we discussed, right? End of the day, AI enabled recommendation connectors. Okay, let's say Now there is kind of right like let's take some integration use case, right? Now, there will be kind of like a 3 to 4 file input nodes where like it has to around 4 to 5 files will come, right? Like what our message flow has to do is right like collect all these things and like until all these files will come up, it has to hold and do kind of like a transformation on top of it. Okay, as a human being and expertise architect, what we can say, okay, use collector nodes there instead of right like a Java compute node and all, right? That kind of an intelligence, right? Like this can understand and right like it will generate, it will suggest, okay, use these are the different integration nodes as part of the solution. That is also one of the highlight about this solution, right? And not last but not least, okay, most of the projects are running on a migration projects, right? Migration means migration from right like IAB to App Connect, right? Like maybe different ESBs to App Connect. So here main objective is understanding the existing legacy code or like improvements of a legacy code. So right like it will provide kind of suggestions to it. Also right like it will modify based on our like go best practices as well as coding guidelines, right? It generates that. That is also highlight of the solution, right? When it comes to futures, like most of the futures we already discussed, just I wanted to touch upon, right? Automated and a closed loop code generated. As I said, right, like it will generate a code. Okay, right, like a developer also add some of this. Not that will be not a final, right? Like there should be code review based on the best practices coding guidelines, right? We will pass on to that. It will generate whatever like the standard code, and right, like the standard of a code any of the client were looking for, and it generates it. And also right like a self-fixing of code, there will be always errors like initial phase with kind of like a chain of thoughts and passing kind of like a chain of thoughts to fix the errors, right? Like it will go into continuous validations and it generates code out of it, right? It can be legacy code or like the code generated from a AI itself. Okay, code optimization. This is very important. Nowadays, a code, any of the transformation logic, right? Like can use like 100 lines of a code. How effectively we can use it. Okay, as part of best practices, if it is a complex mapping, right? Like how we can reduce number of iterations and all, right? That is very important. And like when we are generating kind of a JSON, as we expert, we understand it generates like a garbage code generation, right? How we can utilize that to fix it, all those things can be will be a kind of features as part of this solution. And the prediction of a failure, okay, with the knowledge of okay this like if you are having kind of a predefined right like a failure scenarios, if you pass on that, right, like whatever code generation, right, it will try to understand okay there what could be a possible errors when we deploy particular artifacts onto a production. It identifies that. Let's say take some example, right? A couple of right like deployments, we will forget to connect these failure terminals and right like failure terminals and like error handling terminals of a node. In that case, most of the times we will be not getting to know. Okay, there will be always chances like there will be error, but like either a CI/CD team or like production support team or a developers will not be understanding where exactly these issues are there. It identifies that, it suggests that okay these are the missing points. It gives kind of a suggestion to it. Based on that, we can take an action to it. As I said, any time in the solution, AI powered chatbot, like either starting from a designer, business analyst, CI/CD, or a developer, he can chat, right? Like where is the status of my code generation, or like can you generate a code? Right, like pass the legacy code and generate it anytime, any agents, right? Like it can interact with through right like our orchestration layer, right? Yeah, this is definitely with this there are couple of right like improvements will be there. Like it allows us to self-evaluating intelligent framework, we can enhance it. And also right like what and all the connectors as used as part of a solution, right? It understands all of them and like it create kind of a documentation for no platform maintenance. Okay, coming to it, yeah, benefits of a solution journey. Now we discussed end to end. Now right like a time to for a poll. Yeah, right. Like Andy, you can initiate a poll now. Now, right, like a benefit of this agentic solution, AI solution, right, like it will be increased efficiency, right, like end-to-end SDLC life cycle, and also right, like a quality. Any client will look at the service quality and code correction with a the confidence, right? More confidence of a code generation, right? Like a more accuracy it will be. So right, like we can go and define client. Okay, this framework using of this framework will be right, like ROI. We can define ROIs very easily with this. Okay, and also right, like as we understand, as initially I said, as a human being reading tons of documents, writing a code from a scratch, also right, like writing a kind of a high level design from a start to end with the templates, right? It time consuming. With using this solution, definitely right, like there will be a reduction of any efforts. Right, like from a designer perspective or like a CI/CD or like a BA perspective, mainly on kind of a developer perspective, right? Including all personas of a SDLC will be benefit out of this solution. Next comes to strength and security. As clearly said, right, like there is kind of an API, right, like a API gateway involved. Also, right, like we will be having kind of a secured connectivity from outside this AI framework, so that right, like we can deploy this product on-premise, also on a cloud with a predefined firewalls, right? Like we will be using kind of like a API gateways, right, to make sure there is no leakage of a code outside, even if you are deploying the solution on a cloud. Next one is a prediction, right? Like proactive actions are always preferable. As we said, right, like by generating this code, it can identify understanding, right, like what will be the pitfalls, what could be an issues of this code, then it will provide kind of recommendations. Also review comments to developer or like a designer or to kind of like a CI/CD, right, from this generation. That is the beauty of the benefits of this solution. Last one, adaptive learning from history of a failures. Okay, if you are having kind of a most of the projects, there will be a lot of a failures as an integration, right? Like as we are kind of a solution architect for specialized in integration, we understand always there will be first failures which it will be detected from my integrations. Most of the client will think, okay, the failure at a kind of an integration layer, even like the issues are from a source or like a destination, right? This kind of like adaptive learning from history of failures, right? Like it will provide kind of an insightful right, like a reports to client saying, right, like where exactly the problem is. Also, right, like whatever logs we produce, like output from this will be kind of input for now, right, like any of the observability tools where like it can generate kind of an insightful reports out of it. Finally, the last slide, what technologies we used. As from a programming perspective, Python 3.12 I have used, Scikit, Streamlit. Like I wanted to make like a UI perspective very streamlined, only to initiate and like to see, to pass and like provide kind of configurations for an admin, right? End of the day, like Agentic framework, like it works independently and provide kind of logs. These logs, how effectively we can see on a screen makes sense. So right, like for that purpose, like I used all these things. From integration perspective, IBM API is the one from IBM product. It provides from starting from a proxying of a solution, providing our industry followed a best security techniques. And as it comes to agentic framework, okay, LangChain is a QA doing its level best. LangChain and LangGraph, right, like I used it and we provided it. Also, right, like Watson, as I said, right, like Watson orchestration can adopt this. Also, right, like it provides its own features to adopt like agentic framework. It supports for an agentic framework. When it comes to LLMs, right, as part of complete SDLC, not single LLM can provide entire solution. Okay, with the expertise, with the complete testing, right, like accuracy of this, like a different LLMs we use. Mistral 7B, as I said, right, like a generating kind of a documentation, right, like it was doing good from an integration perspective. IBM Granite for generating an ESQL as JSON, right, like it was doing amazing job. Also, right, like it provides kind of an end of the day, when we say like a message flow, end of the day it's XML. Only thing is each and every nodes has to connected correctly with the predefined tags, okay, that it understands, it able to generate. When it comes to IBM assistant, as I said, right, like a AI powered chatbot, anytime, right, like with complete our agentic AI solution, right, we can interact and get the right, like right, like a response to any of the personas of a SDLC. When it comes to Gemini Flash, it's doing its amazing job while generating kind of like a process flow diagrams, everything. Right, like OpenAI also, right, like a latest 3.4 I have used, it's doing amazing, right, like from generating a documentation, also from a code perspective. Okay, agents orchestration, right? Watson orchestrations can be used, right? Like utilizing like agentic framework of this. Finally, like a knowledge knowledge based. Like FIAs or like ChromaDB is doing better, like we can easily integrate to maintain the chunks of a data. As I said, like we will be having tons of documents that has to be first chunks into kind of like a chunks, and like these chunks will be stored into kind of a vector database for context, right? When we know prompt as well as a context, like we can pass this both to LLM to get kind of an accuracy. This accuracy will be based on how better, like we'll check the data, ingest the documents and pass on to vector DB. Okay. With this, right, like a complete end-to-end session. Yeah, any questions where we can take it up, or like Prashant, you want to add? Prashant?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I think sir, we covered the topics. I suppose the session was for a longer period. I think we ended up having preparation for 30 minutes or so, but yes, I believe we tried to cover what we bring into the table as a Pragma Edge, right? Thanks, Niranjan. It was a pretty insightful, the presentation. So I think as a concluding statement, I want to thank Andy, Dan for giving this opportunity, and of course the IBM. So we at Pragma Edge, we have some of these solutions are ready to use, and some part of them are like in the process of getting delivered. So any of the customers or any of the people who are interested in this kind of a solution to adopt, we are there to connect, and you can always reach out to us. We can plan for a demo, and looking forward to connect. Thank you so much for everyone for joining today's session.
Thank you so much to the Pragma Edge team. We did have one question about, is there a demo available? And Prashant, I did respond to that in the chat as well with your email contact. Once again, too, we will have office hours at 2:30 Eastern time today at the end of the day. So if you want to join and ask questions live of many of our speakers throughout the day, feel free to do so. For now, if you could please direct your attention to the session survey. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what else you'd like to see from us, and how we can better make this event more impactful for you. So again, thank you so much, guys, for kind of sharing from a business partner perspective. Some of the value add that you bring. We rely very heavily on our business partners for the extended community and being able to deliver these services and project successes. So really appreciate you guys sharing your perspective. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up a little early. Next session starts in about 20 minutes. So please, strap in for the final session. And we'll hear a little bit more specifically about another implementation of leveraging these tools that we provide from an IBM perspective. Thanks, Prashant. Thanks, Niranjan. Appreciate your perspective, and we'll wrap it up there.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Dan. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.